Segoli, Nedioliwis, greetings. What is the news with all you phenomenal human beings who are worthy of love? Thank you to each and every one of you who have submitted your midterms, your 2 to 3 minute video, and up to 3 concepts either learned from the class or related to the class. And we believe that truth has no fear from investigation. Thank you. It's an honor to learn alongside you. Looking forward to the rest of your assignments. This week is the cover letter. Next week's the infographic, and the week after that is the final exam, people. So let's keep on keeping on. Checking in on the syllabus here. We are at week 4. So reading myths 9, 10, and 11 from our book. Some of the videos to look here, we're looking at a lot of different sports books and also about powwows, sports films, and also about powwows. Jim Thorpe, one of the greatest athletes of the 20th century, learn more about here. Native American drumming basics in the National Museum of the Native American. What's a powwow? A couple of videos about that. Looking a little bit at our CSULB 45th annual powwow. You have a chance to attend in March at Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Pavungna. Check out our annual powwow, the largest student-run powwow this side of the Mississippi. American Indian Studies, we're also the oldest American Indian Studies program this side of the Mississippi here at Cal State Long Beach. And the ethnic studies originated in the CSUs, so go Beach. Also looking at here a video of me doing smoke dance as well too, a traditional Haudenosaunee dance. And a series from a 1491 called Represent this jingle dance and this laundry dance. So be sure to want to hear your 3 to 7 sentences on the discussions on Canvas, and then also your 3 to 7 sentences on our GroupMe for our community peacemaking circle. You'll see the specific prompt in there. Be sure to turn in that cover letter before 11:59 p.m. on Friday of this week. Good stuff, people. Great stuff. I'm loving it. Let's keep on keeping on. Right now, we are at week 4, and we're going to talk some about federal policy, statutes or laws, and tribal court cases, which relate to Native peoples. So let's get into it, people. You're a human being who is worthy of love. Let's keep on keeping on. Some impactful policy towards Native peoples here. Doctrine of Discovery would put forth this palpable bull saying any lands that are not inhabited by Christian peoples are therefore terra nullius or empty earth or void earth. This is still inactive. Is active to this day. It has not been rescinded to this day. As of 2023, it is still active. Indian Commerce Clause in the Constitution, 1787, says that the federal government is to interact with tribal nations the same way as they do with international entities or with states. Indian Removal Act legalized extermination towards Native peoples. The Major Crimes Act let the federal government come on to native lands when needed. The Dawes Act, also known as the Indian Allotment Act, is what put Native peoples towards what was at one point Oklahoma was supposed to be all Indian country. And then over time, the US government was like, actually, all this promised land towards Native people, we can actually sell and parcel off and do this like checkerboard of the Native populations here and sell the land as well too. Indian Citizenship Act, 1924. This is when Native peoples are granted US citizenship. As before this, as Native peoples are not US citizens, even though people like my great-grandfather, Anderson William Cornelius, and estimated 12,000 other Native peoples who served in World War I, they did this before they were US citizens, so that someday one of their descendants might be able to have the chance of having the rights that they were willing to die for. My great grandfather was a Purple Heart recipient for that. He was injured behind enemy lines. And a lot of people, you may or may not know, that Native peoples, they per capita for their population, make up the highest amount of people that go to serve in different branches of the military. And I've had out of my great aunts and uncles, out of 12 of them, 8 of them served in different branches of the military, different branches. Some of them are Rosie the Riveters and welders. Yes, we can do it. I remember asking some of them, why would you want to help and support a land that has taken so much away from you? I said, well, when you're a warrior, you're taught to protect the land and the people at all costs, no matter what. And while I have not put myself in a military branch, I do see myself in public service as trying to protect the land, protect the people at all costs, whatever we can do to do that. Public Law 280, 1953, shifts this inherent relationship between the federal government and tribes, and it puts it between the tribes and state governments for a number of different states. And there's some of them would include California, Wisconsin, some other states as well too. Indian Relocation Act in 1956. There was this promise to move Native peoples from their tribal nations, these reservations, to put them into cities. They had these advertisements, come to Los Angeles, come to Chicago, to really make it a beautiful thing. When reality, once people got there, it has been said by different people, wait a second, this is where we just came from. We just came from poverty. Why are you putting us here? Once people either had their first paycheck or once they were dropped off on the bus, they oftentimes had no more resources after that. So it was really promising one thing and delivering another, much less promise. Up next here, we have the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Up until then, Native peoples, some Native peoples still were not able to vote. We think about that, what that means to have this representative republic, what it means to be in this democracy if you don't even have a voice in it until 1965. And a lot of resources at that point, when cities are being made, water, energy are being allocated, a lot of Native peoples didn't even have a chance to vote on different things. And this definitely heavily impacts to this day. Indian Self-Determination Act, 1975, letting Native peoples have their own, whether good, bad, or otherwise, have their own power to self-determine, have their own, the fate is in their hands of Native peoples. American Indian Religious Freedom Act, 1978, that Native peoples have the right to have their sacred objects or to have these ceremonies. This is put forth in the American Indian Religious Freedom Act Amendment in 1994 as well too. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which allowed Native peoples to have gaming to support themselves as a way of a base of income. I remember hearing a speaker as for Vermont Law and Graduate School, and somebody was saying, like, Vermont would look a lot like a reservation if we didn't have income, tax, if we didn't have state tax as well. If you didn't have those resources, it could look pretty run down as well too. Not that all reservations are run down. Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, Eastern Band Cherokees, and North Carolina, a number of other tribes as well too. These are beautiful, incredible places by any standards. But indeed, a lot of these are because of gaming, that they have these different funds to be able to put money back in the community. And by all means, it's with gaming can come addiction, can come alcoholism. There's a number of different things. We are still actively looking every day for alternatives to be able to support people financially and be independent, to be able to be less dependent on gaming and on casinos. Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1989, anything that looks like it's a Native act or Native arts or craft is supposed to be made by Native people or have the funds go towards Native peoples. Native American Graves and Protection Act, NAGPRA, that Native sites, burial sites, the sacred ceremonial objects are sacred and they are federally protected, and that those, if found on a construction site, need to be returned to the Native peoples to whom they came from. Violence Against Women Act, this will oftentimes, it has to be re-upped and has to be passed again, and it had been passed in 1994, 2013, 2022, to add a little bit more teeth of this legislative action to those who have violence against women, to make the penalty more severe. United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, also referred to as UNDRIP, and had many different declarations, one of them being that these agreements, these treaties made with tribal nations are supposed to be upheld. Many different people, many countries around the world signed it. Some countries that did not would be New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and perhaps you guessed it, United States as well too. It wouldn't be until the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2016 where the US acknowledges some of these things without some of the same teeth as the UNDRIP had, and saying, yes, there are Native peoples here, without actually having to have the accountability of having to uphold every single treaty that's been broken. We have Savannah's Act and Not Invisible Act. This is for missing and murdered Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous peoples and Two-Spirit peoples. The idea that Savannah's Act and Not Invisible Act was to put what was before a lot of these isolated databases from the city, county, federally, tribally, different independent researchers or private investigators, and it put all these different resources, pooled them together so that people can try to have a better chance of finding these people who are missing murdered Indigenous women as well. And this Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act was put forth in September 2021, where it's being considered the idea of having a similar Truth and Healing Commission as was done in Canada to talk about the Indian boarding schools. As so far, with over the 400 to 500 Indian boarding schools in the United States, only one of them has been searched so far, which is Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is where my great-grandfather was forced to attend, where he ran away twice and he freed himself the second time. So my great-great-uncle was killed, great-great-uncle Joshua. Heavy stuff, right? And the idea is that at the school, every school had a cemetery built into it by design, which is pretty heavy and wild to think about to begin with. If your university or school had to have a cemetery built at it, right? The idea is at Carlisle, there was 180 tombstones for all those people who were identifiable, another 13 tombstones for those who were unidentifiable. And I remember thinking for so long, wow, that must be so hard. I can't even imagine what that'd be like. And it wasn't until within the last couple of years where I was learning this from my grandmother. Yes, one of those people was one of our family members. So heavy things. So as we talk about how do we heal these things, it's acknowledging, educating, and honoring about it. The Indian Commerce Clause in the Constitution we talked about before. The Supremacy Clause we talked about before, the supreme law of the land of these treaties. in the Declaration of Independence, so this one doesn't have as much legal teeth as does the Constitution, but oftentimes people will refer to it as this beautiful document about independence, about freedom. Well, if you look at paragraph 29, it says that he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the, quote, merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions, which is not true, in case you did not know. And even at this point, that the Haudenosaunee would have been heavily influenced the United States Constitution and the formation of the United States. So they'd be saying these words even after all the help that Native people had given them and taking their land as well too. It's an 1864 order to kill Native Americans was voided when Governor Jared Polis of Colorado signs an executive order that rescinds the proclamation, which before that was to kill Native peoples up until August of 2021. This right here is the Winona Daily Republican. This newspaper clipping from 1863 talks about the state reward for dead Indians has been increased to $200 for every, quote, R skin, as this is indeed a racial slur, sent to purgatory. This sum is more than the dead bodies of all the Indians east of the Red River are worth. So it's this policy of extermination. Here's Native American bounties in California. Advertisements in California in the 1860s, $5 per decapitated head of indigenous peoples, 25 cents per scalp. A resource here from some researchers talked about the first year they rolled out the program, they pay $1 million. The state of California does. The second year California rolls out the program, they pay out $1 million from this decapitated heads of peoples at $5, which is at minimum 200,000 people each year, so 400,000 total peoples. And if it's 25 cents per scalp, that's 4 million peoples each year, which is 8 million peoples total. So a lot of different peoples who had been killed from state-sanctioned genocide here in California as well too. So you can see this in a newspaper looking for 30 men wanted to serve in the 1st Battalion as they would looking to fight different Native peoples as well too. Influential court cases, we talk about this Johnson trilogy, this harmful idea of being called wards of the state. Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock says that the US government, the Supreme Court, they can abrogate, which is a fancy word to say we can stop or we can break these treaties whenever we find fitting to us as the United States government. Number of different ones as well too. Oliphant versus Suquamish tribe says that Native people do not have access to, in their own tribal courts, to try to prosecute non-Native peoples who commit crimes against Native peoples. This one is a key point as well too in the missing and murdered Indigenous women and Indigenous peoples. This is a key part of that. Is this the Suquamish, Oliphant versus Suquamish Indian tribe, 1978. Number of different ones as well too that if you take an American Indian law course, you can learn more about as well. Some of these as well too is Brackeen versus Zink, which was going through in the Northern District of Texas, and now is in 2023, I should say, is before the Supreme Court of recognizing is the idea that Native children go in with Native families. Does this break the equal protection clause of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, saying that we're saying that Native people are treated differently? However, the whole reason why the Indian Child Welfare Act was put forth in 1978 was from recommendations by the American Psychological Association that said, you know what, we recognize that Native children, it's really important for them to either go with someone from their own family, and if that's not possible, from someone from their own tribe, or if that's not possible, from someone from a different tribe, because their identity, it's very closely related to their upbringing and their culture. This needs to be talked about how important it is. They need to be brought up in this. This is a huge part of their identity. So in 2023, it's being talked about now by the Supreme Court, being argued pro bono by an organization that has been really big into settler extractionism, into different cases of oil pipelines, with the Dakota Access Pipeline and different things. This organization is pro bono, trying to fight the case to try to overturn the Indian Child Welfare Act. And the idea is it's not just about Indian child welfare, it's about all of American Indian people's rights, all of Native people's rights. The idea that if this gets overturned, it's a slippery slope then to try to argue against all of Native people's rights as sovereign citizens of their own nations, of being able to have their own religious freedoms, of to be able to be Native peoples. This is before it now. Number of different cases as well too. You learn more about it. You can pause any of these. You want to look more about it. Want to go here to look at the doctrine of discovery. This is a 2005 case, and oftentimes Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, was hailed as being very progressive. In this case, they are citing the doctrine of discovery. The fee title to the land occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nation, and later the original states in the United States. So arguing against the Oneida Nation of New York, saying that, well, actually, because the doctrine of discovery, because we weren't Christian peoples, you didn't have rights to the land. So again, this is that doctrine of discovery from 1493, still very active, still very much alive. So if you have the ability to be an activist, to say we need to rescind the doctrine of discovery, as it is still active, so we need to rescind this. Number of different cases as well too. This is a picture from the Indian boarding schools as well too. It's a famous picture looking at Tom Toslino, this Dene person, also known as Navajo. When he's on the left here, when he first entered the school, on the right, the idea was trying to show that he had been killed the Indian to save the man. It really is taking away every form of expression of Native peoples. From the long hair, when this was cut, Native people thought that someone close to them had died. In 1950, the Secretary of the Interior signing a contract to allow the government to purchase land at the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, made without the consent of the reservation's business council chairman, George Gillette, who weeps as he watches King Krug sign it. This is from the occupation of Alcatraz. You all watched a video on that. Dakota Access Pipeline. I was just there for a day. People were there for months. This is oil is water. You can't drink oil. Water is life. This happened in November. There as well too. And there's this phone calls. You also have the music video of who protects the people from the police. And the Morton County Sheriff's Department says, well, if you want to go up the chain of command, next stop is the governor's office, which is why it is so important that you all exercise your rights to vote, or if you have the ability to put yourself in a position of public service to be able to make a change on a grand level as well too. This happens as well too. Mauna Kea, the big island of Hawaii, with the TMT, this large telescope looking to be put in on this sacred mountain where the gods reside. So there's resistance from these native Hawaiian peoples. Enbridge pipeline, you can look at resistline3.org or at resistline3 on social media, which it breaks these different treaties as well too. Some influential people as well too. The Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, Pueblo of Laguna, our National Parks Director, Chuck F. Sams III, from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Kansas' 3rd Congressional District, Representative Sharice Davids of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin, and Paulette Jordan Coeur d'Alene, who served in the Idaho House of Reps from 2014 to 2018. Mary Poltola, who Yupik, Alaska Native, becoming the first Alaska Native in Congress in 2022. First California Indian to be elected to California State Assembly, James Ramos of the Serrano-Coweta tribe, and the first female principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, Wilma Mankiller, 1945 to 2010. You have some other people here, some different thought leaders. You can see the tribal nations which they come from: Winona LaDuke, Russell Means, Dennis Banks, Vine Deloria Jr., Sachin Littlefeather, Leonard Peltier, Richard Oakes, many different influential leaders and human beings. And John Trudell talks about the people must take the political system under their control. These 25 decolonizing methodologies by Linda Smith, this Maori scholar, Indigenous people from New Zealand, talks about these ideas. And you can pause and look at these as well too, but a number of these are as we decolonize and look to indigenize our minds as Native peoples as well too, and as allies. These are a number of different ways to do that. All right, people, invitation, not an obligation, sit up nice and tall for me. Deepest breath of love you've had all day. Breathing like you love yourself as you, yes, you are a human being who is worthy of love. Breathe in some love. Exhale some love. You are love. Yawanko Ganalunkwa Unugiwa means thank you. I love you. Until next time in Oneida, nobody loves you. Dr. Reed loves you. Take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. All the best, people.